You're in the wrong room. Maintenance uses the back entrance.
I'm aware. Mr. Solberg.
Nobody looked at the old groundskeeper twice. Mud on his boots, a faded jacket, hands too rough for a boardroom, the kind of hands that spent their days in dirt, not signatures. One of the lawyers stood. Maintenance uses the back entrance. The old man nodded. I'm aware. He placed a single brass key on the table. Every Norwegian executive stood at once. One dropped his pen. It rolled off the table's edge, and nobody moved to catch it. Another whispered, Mr. Solberg. The bride's smile disappeared. The groom stared. Who is that? The old man answered. The man you've all been stealing from. He let the silence sit, watching the room rearrange itself around a truth it hadn't seen coming. Then, someone in this room will be in handcuffs before the ceremony starts. I'll let you spend the next few minutes wondering who. Cut to black. 6 weeks earlier, Elias Solberg was, by every account the world had access to, a dying man in a Norwegian farmhouse, tended by a private nurse, seeing no one, speaking to no press. That was the story. He had built it himself, and it was mostly a lie. 2 months before the wedding, alone in his Oslo office at 11 at night, he'd opened a ledger that shouldn't have existed, forwarded to him by accident, showing transfers routed through the Busan terminal that matched nothing in the official books. Small amounts at first, then not small at all. He called the junior accountant who'd sent it, half terrified she'd be fired for the mistake. I wasn't supposed to send that to your personal address, sir. It was meant for the compliance folder. I can explain. You're not in trouble, Elias said, forcing calm into his voice. Tell me who has access to that account. Only 3 people, sir. Yourself, your son, through his executive login, and Mr. Kessler, for oversight purposes. He sat with that answer a long time after hanging up, the office dark around him, the number 3 repeating in his head like a wound he couldn't stop touching. Henrik he refused to consider. Himself, obviously not. Which left one name he had trusted for 19 years, and had never once had reason to doubt. He called Ingrid Vold, his physician of 19 years, at midnight. I need you to help me disappear, he said. You're serious. I have never been more serious in my life. You have a wedding in 6 weeks. Your son's wedding. That's exactly why, Elias said. I need to vanish before it happens, not after. Once the ceremony starts, the merger executes automatically. The wire transfer, the signatures, all of it, time to disappear into the noise of the celebration. If someone inside my own company is bleeding it dry, that's the moment they'll finish the job, while everyone's looking at the bride. And if you're wrong about who it is, then I've insulted a loyal man for 6 weeks, and I'll spend the rest of my life apologizing for it, Elias said. I can live with that. I can't live with signing my son's future over to a thief because I was too proud to look closely enough to find out. You understand what this will do to Henrik. Believing you're dying. I understand it will be the cruelest thing I've ever done to him, Elias said, and his voice, for the first time in the call, broke slightly. I'm doing it anyway, because the alternative is worse. Subscribe before we continue, because every clue you're about to see leads to a twist nobody inside that boardroom expected. He arrived in Busan under a dead man's name, a real groundskeeper, retired the year before, paid handsomely to let an old friend borrow his identity for a while. The estate's household staff turned over often enough that a new hire raised no questions. Nobody looks twice at a man trimming hedges. His cover nearly broke on the 3rd day. Sonny, the estate's longtime housekeeper, who had met the real Elias Solberg a dozen times over the years, at anniversary dinners, at his wife's funeral, once even at this very estate, stopped in the kitchen garden and studied his face a beat too long. Do I know you? I don't believe so, ma'am. He kept his eyes down, his voice deliberately flattened into something unfamiliar, a register he'd practiced alone in the cottage for 3 nights before daring to use it near anyone. You look like someone. I can't place it. She tilted her head, unconvinced. Have you worked estates in Norway before? Denmark, mostly. Different family entirely, he lied, and felt his pulse hammering the entire time she considered him. She let it go eventually, distracted by a delivery truck at the gate, and Elias spent the rest of that day certain the whole plan was about to collapse before it had properly begun. He shaved that night, let the beard grow back wrong and uneven, Started wearing a canvas hat low over his eyes whenever he crossed anyone who'd known him longer than a decade. It was the kind of mistake, trusting his own face to stay unremarkable. He had gotten away with it. He had not been clever. There was a difference, and he made himself remember it. One person noticed him anyway, and did not let it go. Mira Castillo, 26, hired 8 weeks earlier as a junior gardener, caught him staring at the main house with an expression that had nothing to do with hedges at all. "You're new," she said, the first week, watching him fumble pruning shears like a man who had never once in his life held a pair. "I am. You hold those wrong. I've been told." "You also," she said, with the particular bluntness of someone who'd grown up with nothing to lose and had never learned to be careful with her words. "Don't walk like a man who's spent his life doing manual labor. You walk like someone important." His heart had nearly stopped. "I used to work in an office," he said carefully, "before I decided offices were a waste of a life." She laughed at that, unguarded, real, and something in his chest, tight for weeks with grief and fear, loosened slightly. "I like you," she said. "You don't talk much. That's rare around here." He didn't tell her, that day, that he was listening to everything. What he didn't know, that first week, was that his son had beaten him to the ledger by nearly a month. Henrik Solberg had felt it before he could name it. A wrongness in the way Beck Maritime's valuation numbers kept sliding downward, a little more each week, always explained away by Kessler as normal deal mechanics. 3 weeks before his father's diagnosis was announced, Henrik had quietly hired an independent forensic accountant in Seoul, a woman named Grace O, paid in cash, told to speak to no one at the company. "If I'm wrong," Henrik told her, in a coffee shop 2 subway stops from the office where no one would recognize either of them. "This never happened. If I'm right, I want proof I can hand to a prosecutor, not a suspicion I can hand to my future father-in-law." "You understand what you're asking," Grace said. "If this is real, it's not a small thing. It's not one bad quarter. Numbers that shift this consistently, this quietly, over this many months, that's not carelessness. That's design, built by someone patient enough to make it look like nothing at all." "I know. And if the person behind it is someone your father trusts completely? Someone who's been in the room for every major decision this company has made for 2 decades? Henrik hadn't answered that one for a long moment, staring into his coffee like it might offer an easier truth than the one in front of him. "Then I need to know that more than I need to be comfortable," he said finally. Neither Henrik nor his father knew the other was digging through the same rot from opposite ends of the company. Kessler didn't know it either, not yet. But he would, and sooner than either of them wanted. Kessler noticed the pattern before he understood it. A groundskeeper who lingered too long near the estate office. A gardener who reorganized files that didn't need reorganizing. A missing folder, found again, in a slightly different drawer than he remembered leaving it. Small things, the kind a careless man would dismiss. But Kessler had never once in 19 years been a careless man. He said nothing to anyone. He simply began, carefully, methodically, to test. He left a false document in his desk one evening. Numbers slightly altered from the real ones, a decimal shifted, a total inflated by a figure small enough to look like an honest transcription error, and told no one it existed. 3 days later, a version of those false numbers surfaced in a casual, poorly disguised question from the new groundskeeper about how the estate budget worked, out of curiosity. Kessler smiled to no one, alone in the office that night, and poured himself a drink he didn't usually allow himself before 10. Someone was watching him. He didn't yet know who. The groundskeeper seemed too convenient a suspect, too obvious, and Kessler had learned, in 19 years of protecting other people's secrets, that obvious suspects were rarely the ones worth fearing. He assumed, wrongly, that the groundskeeper was merely a conduit, a set of hands feeding information to someone smarter, someone still hidden. He intended to find that person before they finished whatever they were building against him. He was, for the first time in the entire scheme, both right and catastrophically wrong at once. "I need your help with something," Elias told Mira, 10 days in, having decided, against every instinct 40 years of business had taught him, that he needed one ally uncompromised by corporate loyalty. "With hedges? With something that could get us both in serious trouble." He looked at her carefully, weighing, for the last time, whether this was fair to ask of anyone. "I think Lars Kessler is stealing from this family. I need someone who can move through that house without anyone questioning it." Someone I can trust completely. Why trust me? You've known me 10 days. Because in 10 days, you've never once lied to me. Not about the hedges, not about my technique, not about anything. That's rarer than you'd think, where I come from. She studied him a long moment. Are you in danger? Actually in danger, or the kind rich men imagine themselves in? I don't know yet, Elias admitted. That's the honest answer. I don't love that answer. Neither do I. It's the only one I have. She agreed anyway. For 2 weeks it worked cleanly. She photographed a late-night visitor Kessler met twice a week, a man from Beck Maritime's valuation office named Director Yoon. She noted which documents left the estate in Kessler's briefcase and which stayed locked in the office overnight. It felt, for those 2 weeks, like they were finally ahead of something instead of chasing it. Then the false numbers Kessler had planted made their way to Elias through Mira, and Elias, believing them real, very nearly carried them to Axel Berga as proof of the fraud. He caught the error only hours before sending it, a single digit, deliberately wrong, buried specifically to see whether it would surface anywhere Kessler could trace it back. Elias sat with the file open on his lap in the cottage, hands unsteady, understanding for the first time in 6 weeks that he was not, in fact, several moves ahead of a man who had spent 19 years learning exactly how Elias thought, argued, and made decisions under pressure. He's testing us, Elias told Mira that night, voice tight. He knows someone's watching. He doesn't know who yet. That means we're already losing time we didn't think we had, and I nearly handed him proof that I was the one asking questions. What if you had sent it? Then he'd have known exactly how close we were, and exactly how to disappear before we could prove anything real, Elias said. I made a mistake. I need you to know that, because I need you to stop assuming I know what I'm doing at every step of this. I don't. I'm improvising as much as you are. Mira was quiet for a moment. That's the first honest thing you've said to me since you told me your name wasn't really Petter. It won't be the last honest thing, Elias said. I promise you that much. Kessler moved the following week. Mira was called into the estate office and told, without real explanation, that her position was being re-evaluated, her hours cut in half, her access to the main house revoked pending a staffing review, that no one could explain the reasoning for when she asked. It wasn't a firing. It was worse, a warning, precise enough that both of them understood exactly what it meant, and vague enough that she had no grounds to challenge it. He knows it's me, Mira said, shaking, sitting on the cottage's single wooden chair that night, arms wrapped around herself like she could hold the fear in by force. Or he suspects enough to want me gone without needing a real reason at all. He suspects, Elias said. If he knew for certain, you wouldn't have a job at all. You'd have been escorted off the property within the hour, and there would already be a story ready to explain why. That's supposed to be reassuring? No, Elias admitted. It's supposed to be honest. I don't have anything reassuring to offer you right now. What do I do? Nothing, Elias said, and hated how much it cost him to say it. You do nothing, and you let him believe he's frightened you into stopping. I will not let this cost you your safety, Mira. If it comes down to a choice between finishing this and protecting you, I choose you. Every time. I need you to understand that before you decide anything else. That's not your choice to make instead of mine. Her voice hardened, the fear in it burning off into something closer to anger. I didn't come this far to disappear the moment it got difficult, just because a rich man decided he'd rather feel noble than let me finish what I started. I chose this too, the same day you did. That has to count for something. He looked at her for a long moment. A woman half his age, with far less to gain and everything to lose, refusing to be protected out of a fight she had chosen for herself. It reminded him, uncomfortably, of himself at 26, before caution had calcified into instinct. Then we move faster, he said finally. Before he decides a warning wasn't enough, and does something neither of us can undo. How much faster? Days, Elias said. Not weeks. We don't have weeks anymore. The close call came 4 nights later. Elias was in the records room past midnight, retrieving what Mira could no longer safely reach when the door opened behind him. You're not supposed to be in here. Kessler, in his shirt sleeves, having returned late for something Elias would never learn the reason for. Thought I heard my sir, Elias said, hunching his shoulders, letting 6 weeks of practice disguise carry the moment his racing pulse couldn't. Kessler studied him a beat too long. eyes moving from Elias's face to his hands, to the drawer he'd been standing beside. Mice. Nasty things this time of year. Chew through wiring. I'll have someone deal with it, Kessler said, still not moving, still watching. What's your name again? Petter, sir. Elias kept his voice low, flat, praying the years of boardroom composure wouldn't betray him now, of all moments. Petter. He said it slowly, testing the shape of it, the way a man tests a lock he suspects has been picked. You've been here, what, 6 weeks now? About that, sir. Funny, Kessler said. I don't remember approving a new hire 6 weeks ago. Elias felt his pulse spike into something close to panic. Agency placement, sir. Through the usual staffing firm. Kessler said nothing further, but as Elias passed him in the doorway, he felt the man's eyes on his back the entire length of the hallway, and did not breathe normally again until he was 300 meters from the house, hands braced against the cottage's outer wall, waiting for his own heart to slow. It was the second time in 6 weeks he'd nearly lost everything to a door opening at the wrong second, and he understood, standing there in the dark, that he had been careless, that a younger version of himself, the one who'd built an empire from a single leased ship, would never have taken the risk of the records room at all without a second exit already mapped, a cover story already rehearsed to the syllable. He admitted to himself for the first time, not entirely certain he was still that man. Kessler spent the night after the records room encounter doing what he did best, recalculating. A groundskeeper who knew the exact wording of a private conversation. A gardener whose access had been quietly restricted without complaint. A prosecutor's office that had, according to a contact he still had inside the ministry, received an informal inquiry about Solberg Group 2 weeks earlier and let it die on a junior officer's desk. None of it, on its own, was proof of anything. Together, it was a shape he didn't like. He considered, briefly, simply finishing the transfer early, moving the funds before the wedding, abandoning the elegant cover of a joyful, distracting ceremony. He decided against it. An early transfer would draw exactly the kind of scrutiny the wedding was designed to avoid, and 19 years of patience had taught him that the men who panicked were always the men who got caught. He would watch the groundskeeper a little longer. He would let the wedding proceed exactly as planned. And if, in the final hours, the shape in front of him resolved into something he recognized, he would be ready to disappear before anyone could stop him. He did not yet believe the groundskeeper was Elias Solberg. That thought hadn't occurred to him even once. It was, in the end, the only miscalculation that mattered. 2 days later, Henrik's forensic accountant surfaced something that changed the shape of everything. A decades-old company record, buried in an old filing migration, showing that in a crisis 19 years earlier, a hostile takeover attempt that very nearly ended Solberg Group before its expansion into Asia, it hadn't been Elias who found the structural flaw in the attacker's financing and closed it in time. It had been Kessler, working alone through 3 sleepless nights, presenting the solution to the board at dawn. The board minutes credited Elias by name. The press release that followed, the one still archived on the company's own website, described Elias Solberg's decisive leadership in single-handedly saving 1,900 jobs. Kessler's name appeared nowhere in it. Not as an oversight, Grayso's research suggested, but because Elias, exhausted and frightened in the days after the crisis, had simply never thought to correct the record, and Kessler, young and eager to be seen as loyal rather than ambitious, had never once asked him to. He had carried that silence for 19 years. He had smiled at every anniversary dinner. He had stood beside Elias at his wife's funeral, close enough that Elias had gripped his arm to stay upright, and said nothing of the debt he believed the company owed him. Somewhere in those 19 years, patience had curdled into certainty, and certainty into permission. I saved this company once, Kessler told Director Yoon. The last time they met before the wedding, in words Mira would only piece together weeks later from a recording she should never have been able to make. Everyone in that boardroom knows it, and not one of them ever said it out loud where it mattered. I'm not stealing from Elias Solberg. I'm collecting a debt he was too proud, or too careless, to ever pay. Henrik found the old groundskeeper by the rose garden the night before the wedding, unable to sleep. Can I tell you something? Henrik said, settling onto the bench without waiting for permission, the particular ease of a man who'd never learned that servants weren't meant to be confided in. You seem like someone who'd just listen, not judge, not have an opinion about my father's company or my father's money. I'm listening. I hired an accountant. In secret. 3 weeks ago now, maybe longer. Henrik rubbed his face with both hands. Because something about this merger feels wrong, and I didn't trust anyone at the company enough to ask directly. Not the board, not Kessler, not even my own father, before he got sick, because I was afraid he'd tell me I was imagining things, or worse, that he already knew and had decided it didn't matter enough to stop. What did the accountant find? Enough to frighten me, Henrik admitted. Enough that I haven't told Suyun, because I don't know yet whether her family is part of it or victims of it, and I can't tell the difference from where I'm standing. He looked at the old groundskeeper, desperate in a way that had nothing to do with class or status. If I'm right, I'm about to marry into a family that helped rob my own father blind while everyone told me it was just deal mechanics, and signed the papers myself that let it happen. Elias sat very still, every instinct screaming to reach for his son's shoulder, to say his name, to end 6 weeks of lies in a single sentence. He didn't. Then trust that feeling. He said instead, voice rough with everything he couldn't say. A man who built what your father built didn't do it by ignoring the moment something felt wrong in his gut. Don't sign anything tomorrow until you understand every number on that page. Whatever it costs you to wait. And if waiting costs me the wedding, then it cost you the wedding, Elias said. Better that than spending the rest of your life having signed away your father's life's work to keep from causing a scene at your own ceremony. Henrik studied him for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. You talk like you knew him. My father. I know him better than anyone alive, Elias said quietly, and for once, it was entirely, devastatingly true. Axel Berge's first call to the South Korean prosecutor's office went nowhere useful. Kessler, warned by the false document test weeks earlier, had already begun quietly restructuring the shell accounts, moving just enough through legitimate-looking cross-border channels to make the paper trail resemble ordinary banking rather than fraud in progress. They don't believe it's enough, Axel told Elias. 2 days before the wedding, his voice tight with frustration down a line Elias had insisted on keeping as secure as money could make it, not without something that ties the transfer directly to intent. A confession, a recording, something Kessler can't explain away later as an accountant's ordinary caution. What about Director Yoon? The visits, the folder Mira photographed. Circumstantial. A lawyer meeting a business contact isn't a crime on its own, Elias, and you know that better than anyone who's ever sat across a table from a prosecutor. 19 years of an unblemished record makes Lars Kessler an unlikely target for a formal inquiry based on a groundskeeper's photographs and a housekeeper's suspicion. Then I need to get him to say it himself, Elias said, in front of witnesses who matter. In a room he can't quietly leave. How do you plan to do that? I plan to stop hiding, Elias said. Tomorrow, everyone in that room is going to find out exactly who's been listening for 6 weeks, including him, Elias. Axel's voice softened, old friendship cutting through decades of formality. If this goes wrong, if he realizes what's happening a single second before you want him to, he disappears with whatever he's already moved, and you never get the full picture. Do you understand that? I understand it completely, Elias said. I also understand I've spent 6 weeks watching my son fight for a company he doesn't know is already partly his father's to lose. I am done watching from a distance. The lawyers gathered at 9 the next morning to finalize the merger before the noon ceremony, Kessler's arrangement, so the wedding and the wire authorization would blur into a single, unquestioned day. Elias walked in through the front entrance for the first time in 6 weeks. You're in the wrong room, the bride said, not looking at him properly. He let the silence stretch. Someone in this room is going to be arrested before the ceremony begins, he said again, slower this time, watching it land on every face but one. I'll let you keep wondering who. Chairman Beck rose halfway out of his seat, one hand flat against the table. Solberg, what is the meaning of this? We were told you were incapacitated. Your own son signed the preliminary terms in good faith, based on that understanding. Good faith, Elias repeated, tasting the words like something spoiled. We'll return to that, Chairman Beck. In a moment. Elias. Kessler's voice, carefully even, though Elias, watching closely now, could see the muscle working in his jaw. You're supposed to be dying? I let you believe that. Elias turned fully toward him, and every practiced calm he'd carried for 6 weeks fell away, leaving only the exhaustion underneath it. I disguised myself as my own groundskeeper for 6 weeks, Lars, because I needed to know who would protect this family when they thought I was gone. And who would rob it? This is absurd. You have no proof of anything. Henrik, Elias said, without looking away from Kessler. You told the groundskeeper something yesterday. About the accountant. About your doubts. Henrik went pale, the color draining out of his face so fast Soo-Yun reached for his arm. You? I've been listening for 6 weeks, Elias said quietly, and his voice cracked on it. The first real break anyone in that room had heard from him. Every conversation, every doubt you were too afraid to bring to me directly, you brought to a stranger with mud on his boots, because you thought I was dying and didn't want to burden me. I know how frightened you've been. I know how alone you felt, sitting by that garden every night wondering if you were the only one who saw what was wrong. I let you feel that alone, because I didn't trust anyone enough to tell them the truth, not even you. His voice caught fully now. That's the part I'll spend the rest of my life apologizing for. Not catching him, letting you carry this by yourself, when I was 300 meters away the entire time. Henrik said nothing. His jaw worked, grief and fury and something that looked uncomfortably close to betrayal moving across his face all at once. And for a moment the whole room seemed to be holding its breath around the two of them instead of around Kessler. You still have nothing, Kessler said, though his hands, Elias noticed, had begun to shake against the edge of the table. I have a recording of you telling Director Yoon you're not stealing from me, Elias said. You are collecting. For a takeover 19 years ago. For a name that should have been on a press release instead of mine. He softened, just slightly, the first genuine grief he'd let Kessler see in 19 years of friendship. You saved this company once, Lars. I should have known that. I should have said it, out loud, in front of that board, decades ago, and I never did, because I was young and frightened and grateful in a way I never learned how to show properly. I'm sorry I never did. It doesn't make any of this forgivable. But I understand it now, in a way I didn't understand it an hour ago. Kessler's composure finally broke, not into confession, but into something colder, older, worn smooth by 19 years of rehearsal. Understanding doesn't undo it. No, Elias agreed. It doesn't. Nothing either of us says in this room undoes 19 years, or 6 weeks, or any of it. The door opened. Two of the catering staff, who had been stationed quietly throughout the estate since dawn, stepped forward, badges now visible at their belts, followed by the prosecutor's liaison, and, a step behind him, Axel Berge himself, having flown in 2 days earlier under a name that wasn't his own. Lars Kessler, you're being detained on suspicion of financial fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to defraud a foreign corporation, pending formal charges. Kessler didn't run. There was nowhere to run to. He simply stood there, in the room where he'd spent 19 years being trusted completely, and said nothing at all, which somehow felt worse to everyone watching than any denial could have. Soo-Yun turned to her own father, voice sharp with something between fury and heartbreak. Did you know? Any of it? No. Chairman Beck said, ashen, his composure cracking entirely for the first time in the entire encounter. I swear to you, I knew nothing of Director Yoon's arrangement with Kessler. I will cooperate fully with whatever investigation follows. All of it. I need you to believe that. I don't know what to believe right now, she said, and looked instead at Henrik, who was still staring at his father as though the floor beneath him had become something entirely unfamiliar. Henrik, Elias said, quieter now, the room around them still full of officers and lawyers and stunned executives, none of whom mattered in that moment as much as the 6 feet of distance between father and son. I am so sorry. I lied to you for 6 weeks because I was afraid the truth would change how you acted around the one man I needed you to keep acting normally around. That fear was about me, not about whether I trusted you. I see that now, and I saw it too late. You let me grieve you, Henrik said, and his voice finally broke completely. For 6 weeks, I sat by a phone every night waiting for a call telling me you were gone, and grieved you in advance, every single day, while you were 300 meters away watering roses and listening to me fall apart in a garden. I know, Elias said. I don't expect that to be forgivable today. I only need you to know that I understand exactly what it cost you, and that I will spend as long as it takes earning back what I broke, however long that is. The wedding happened 3 weeks later, smaller, quieter, no lawyers in sight. Before the vows, Henrik pressed the same brass key back into his father's hand. "I don't need this to remind me who you are anymore," he said. "I watched you become someone else for 6 weeks to protect this family, and you still ended up being exactly who I always thought you were underneath it. Give it to whoever earns it next." Elias looked down at it, worn smooth by years he hadn't shared with anyone, and thought of 6 cold weeks, of a ledger arriving by accident, of a woman half his age who'd refused to be protected out of a fight she'd chosen for herself, of the 19 years of silence he'd never once thought to break. At the edge of the garden, unnoticed by most of the guests, Mira watched the ceremony begin, reinstated the week before, her warning quietly buried along with everything else Kessler had tried to bury first. "I think," Elias murmured, to no one in particular, "I already gave it to exactly the right people." And sometimes, the most powerful comeback begins the moment the world stops recognizing who you are. Subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark.